The Air Force training instructor loomed over me like a desert thundercloud, his Smokey the Bear hat threatening my forehead. I can't believe this. The military must be desperate to take people like you. You're the poorest excuse for a cadet that I've ever seen, the man shouted. I could feel the vibrations of his roar reverberating off my face. Where's your bag, Slick? Catch that bus home. Do you hear me? I said run, flyboy. I swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on my brow. I turned to blindly obey. Staff Sergeant Collier continued shouting as I stumbled down the empty street after the bus that had departed more than 30 minutes earlier. On my heels, like a trained attack dog, the TI hounded me, demanding I catch the phantom bus. Lord, I prayed, this can't be right. I just got here. How can this happen? It had been an exhausting day for my family's tearful farewell in Portland, Oregon. The flight to the San Antonio, Texas airport, to the long wait for the military bus that would take me and several other recruits to Lackland Air Force Base. And now at 1 in the morning, this no-nonsense, 6'6", 250-pound training instructor bellowing insults at me, humiliating me before the men who would make up my squad during the Air Force Training Academy camp. My throat closed. His words stung. Lord, I can't run any farther. I can't. My legs faltered, threatening to collapse under me. At the same time, a tape recording played in my memory. Words affirming the training instructor's evaluation of me. Ugly words such as useless, troublemaker, mentally incompetent, disturbed, and dummy rang in my head. Years earlier, I heard those words from the lips of my second grade teacher and from my classmates. Those hated words hammered out the cadence of my stride. Stupid, stupid. You are so stupid. Where did you get the idea that you could make it in the military? Somewhere in the course of my middle of the night marathon, I realized I was running alone. My adversary no longer bayed at my heels. I paused to catch a breath, suspiciously glancing over my right shoulder. Sergeant Collier had returned to the troops. He caught my eye and waved. Get back here, Slick. I'll let you stay for the night, but in the morning, you're out of here. Got that? I stumbled back to where the men stood at attention. As I saluted my TI, I couldn't miss the smirk teasing the corners of his mouth. All right, men, file into the barracks. You, Slick, wait here for 5 minutes, then come inside. I took a deep breath as I watched the men disappear into the barracks. I eyed the imposing building that would become my home for the next 6 weeks, if I survived Sergeant Collier. The barracks held several units, or, as the Air Force referred to them, flights of trainees. How would I locate Collier in my flight in the middle of the night? But of course, that's what my TI wanted. He wanted to discourage me enough so that I would go home. I'd become his sacrificial lamb. If I left, he would point to me as an example of a quitter, a pansy, a washout. Lord, I can't let that happen. You guided me into the military. Even my mother believes that. And you know my mother. Thought of my mother's unwavering faith in her God and in her son. Would I let her down, disappoint her? At that moment, it was a distinct possibility. I don't know where to go, Lord. All I know for sure is that the flight went upstairs to the second floor. Please help me find my unit. I climbed the stairs, my courage and my luggage dragging behind me. What would happen if I chose the wrong door? I would wake up the inhabitants of the entire building before finding my own flight unit. How many doors were there anyway? I tried the door at the top of the stairs, a cleaning closet. The next door was locked. I tried each knob down the long hallway. With each knob, I took a deep breath, hoping I wouldn't get into trouble for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I released the breath when the knob refused to turn in my hand. I began to worry that all the doors would be locked, that my TI had locked me out and I'd have to sleep on the floor in the hallway. Finally, halfway down the corridor, one of the knobs turned in my hand. I opened the door slowly and peered inside, to find myself face to face with a startled Sergeant Collier. Evidently, he never expected me to find my flight so soon. Recovering quickly, he ordered me to find an empty bunk and get ready for bed. By the time I stretched out on the lumpy military issue mattress at the far end of the room, I thought nothing and no one could keep me awake. But I was wrong. As physically exhausted and emotionally depleted as I was, my mind continued digging up painful memories long since buried. The hours dragged by slowly until my mind, tired of its destructive game, it allowed me to sleep. Then the dreams began. I found myself behind a dusty furnace in the basement of the elementary school I'd attended, hiding from my second grade teacher, Mrs. Pennyworth. 12 years disappeared as if they'd never occurred, and I was once again a frightened, stuttering 7-year-old, too big for his age. Being one of the first African American children to be integrated into an all white school in Portland, Oregon didn't help. I had angered my teacher again. I wasn't sure how, but I had. Whenever a fight broke out on the playground, Mrs. Pennyworth blamed me, even when I wasn't involved. I hated being the first child she turned to whenever anything went awry. I hated being the class dummy who couldn't recognize anything beyond the first 3 letters of the alphabet. Whenever I tried to read, the letters danced and gyrated on the page before my face. The word saw came out as was, and dog became God. But that was only if I could concentrate hard enough to detect the shape of the individual letters. Both the teacher and the students in my class called me retard, but since I didn't know the meaning of the term, it didn't really matter to me. However, I did hate being the last chosen for spelling bees in class projects, and I hated being the butt of her censure and the object of her disgust, even if I couldn't understand why. I remembered Mrs. Pennyworth answering a student's question with, "Terry's allowed to color during reading class because he's retarded," or "Terry can't go on the class outing unless his mother accompanies him." I don't want to be responsible for the safety of a retarded child. Then there was dumb old Terry ran away from school again. Her threat to an unruly child was, "Be quiet, or I'll put you in the back of the room with Terry," or "I'll put Terry on your side in the spell down this afternoon." I lived 2 lives, a dummy at school and a newshound at home. I preferred the evening news to cartoons. While my mother prepared supper, I would sit at the kitchen table and watch the national news. Names like Dan Rather, Ted Koppel, David Brinkley meant more to me than Bullwinkle, Porky Pig, and the Roadrunner. This Terry could intelligently discuss politics and world economics with any adult that entered our home. At family gatherings, my mother loved saying, "Terry, tell your Uncle Jesse about what's happening with Watergate." and I would give my uncle details on the findings that they had been reported up to that time. I could also rattle off the latest stock market trends on command. Yet this Terry could seldom hold his own against the teacher's unrelenting attacks at school. That first night at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, as I lay awake in the dark, listening to the snoring and mumbling of the other recruits, I became Mrs. Pennyworth's Terry once again. As a child, I passed between the two Terrys with relative ease. Yet every once in a while, my retarded persona spilled over into my other life. The results always devastated me. My family attended the Maranatha Church in Portland. The Christmas I was in second grade, the church choir director came to the children's department to ask for volunteers to sing in the holiday children's choir. This was an important event for 7 to 8 year olds, and the children eagerly volunteered. I raised my hand along with more than 20 other children. The Sunday school teacher listed the names of the other children on the board, but ignored my hand. When the choir director pointed me out, the teacher said, "You know Terry's retarded. We can't use a retarded boy up front." The other kids snickered, and I hid my face with embarrassment. Hearing the teacher's remark, my cousin Yolanda marched me out of the class and asked her father to take me home. Couldn't believe that a Sunday school teacher would do something like that to me. How did she know? I wondered. Who told her I was a dummy? Later, I discovered that she was good friends with a teacher at my school. Her source of information. I never enjoyed attending that Sunday school class again. One day, the public school guidance counselor sent a letter home to my mother. I often heard the term retarded, but I didn't really understand what it meant. I just knew it was something bad, something that made my mother cry. To me, the letter was just another note. I took the notes home from school regularly. My teacher always had some misdemeanor to report. I tried to think of what I might have done. That day had been a good day at school. I couldn't remember doing anything wrong. Yet, as my mother read the letter, tears slid down her cheeks. I asked her what was wrong, but she only held me in her arms, kissed the top of my head, and cried all the more. When Linda, my older sister, got home from work, she read the letter aloud. I listened, trying to understand. Along with the familiar phrases such as lazy, retarded, and mentally defective, the letter included additional new words unfamiliar to me: psychologist, expulsion, McLaren's School for the Mentally Disabled. The letter said that the school psychologist had given me the inkblot test. When questioned, I remember being shown cards with blots of ink on them. I have no idea what I might have said during the interview, but I remembered wondering what the doctor was writing on his yellow scratch pad. Because of the answers I gave, he recommended I be removed from the Oregon public school system and institutionalized until I became of age. On my 18th birthday, the state would decide if I were competent enough to re-enter society. That day, I would never have guessed how much my life would be affected by those labels. Whenever I faced a difficult problem, every time I considered trying something new, or if I dared to dream beyond the immediate, those labels surfaced in my mind and screamed at me. "You can't do it, dummy. You're too stupid. You're too slow." Even after successfully completing the Air Force Police Academy training and after serving in the President's Honor Guard longer than any person up to that time, the labels programmed into my mind when I was a child of 7 kicked in whenever I faced a difficult situation. After leaving the Air Force, I applied to Oakwood College, where a friend of mine attended. Excited about beginning my academic career, I went to see my assigned guidance counselor. The guidance counselor looked at my test scores from academy and pre-college. Terry, give up the idea of becoming a pastor. You just don't have the background for it. You'll have to take Hebrew and Greek. Being dyslexic would make that impossible. You should consider working toward a certificate instead of a degree. I shook my head. No, God led me here to become a preacher, and that's what I'm going to become. Her head wagged back and forth. I'm sorry, you can't do that. She proved to be wrong. Greater battles took place in my mind, not in my classwork. Constantly I had to defeat the labels pasted onto me as a child, but I reached my goals in record time. At graduation from Oakwood, I received commendation from the President of the United States for my accomplishments. I never would have achieved that if I'd listened to the negative recordings in my head and to the words of my guidance counselor. Later at La Sierra University, pressure mounted on me to complete a research paper, the last of my requirements for graduation with a master's degree. I had to get a B or higher, or I would have to retake the class the following year. Although I had received excellent grades, this one last paper haunted me. As I sat in the library with towers of reference books stacked around me, I could hear my second grade teacher's voice again. Terry, you're not going to make it. You're too dumb. You're fooling yourself. You've tricked these people into believing you've overcome this. I tried to block out the voice, but it continued unrelentingly. Terry, the reality is you're slow, retarded. You'll never be able to learn like the other students. Face it. Be satisfied with what you've already accomplished. But my very presence there at La Sierra University was an evidence of God's blessing. From college, I had begun pastoring in Oregon, where the church leaders encouraged me to take time off to get a master's degree, as other young pastors did, except I couldn't afford it. Then, out of the blue, a woman, Nona Korchek, called asking if I would speak at her church near the university. The upshot of it was that she and her family made room for me in their home while I worked on my master's degree in youth ministry. But that didn't make the actual academic work any easier. I started at my blank computer screen. I could hear my second grade peers chanting in a sing-song rhythm. Stupid Terry, retarded Terry, dummy, dummy, dummy Terry. Will the nightmare ever end? I asked myself for the millionth time. Labels are great inventions for identifying canned goods on the grocery store shelf. A label informs shoppers whether they're purchasing peas or asparagus, carrots or creamed corn. Such information is important to know when buying groceries, but when labeling people, slow, bright, pretty dumb, fat, the results are almost always devastating and destructive. We each begin life looking at our surroundings through the eyes of a child, innocent and eager to learn. We learn to identify the faces of our parents, the voices of family members. We learn to smile, to eat with a spoon, to drink from a cup. We discover who we are and what is expected of us. During those early years, if we're told we're stupid, lazy, unwanted, we begin storing these negative labels for future reference. The labels shape our thinking. We grow up believing what we hear and what we experience. And while we may bury our pain deep within our memories. Whenever the adult feels insecure, the little child inside replays the original tape of insults recorded many years previously. Recently, I met an 84-year-old man, a wealthy professional, one of the most successful people I'd ever known, who still remembers the painful experiences he had as a 12-year-old. With tears streaming down his face, he told me how his father had always called him stupid, dummy, good for nothing. You'll never amount to anything. The father had told him. I could never please him. The man's pain showed in his face. 70 years later, this successful businessman still hurts from the labels his father attached to him. The father is dead, yet his words reach out to his son from the grave. The son had spent his whole life trying to prove his father wrong. He was he never succeeded, at least in the arena he that mattered, the arena of the mind. Those early insults voided all his successes and sullied all his joys. Once, while I was speaking to prisoners at a penitentiary, I couldn't take my eyes away from the face of one of the inmates in the very back of the room. After the program, the man stood in line to speak with me. When I went to the back to meet him, he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I took a long look at his face, but no name would come to mind. "You look familiar," was all I could venture. When he told me his name, Warren, not his real name, I remembered him. I hadn't heard him mentioned in 20 years. He'd been one of my classmates in second grade, another of Mrs. Pennyworth's labeling victims. I asked him about his life. He told me he was doing a 3-term sentence. Tears glistened in my eyes as he told me about being in and out of jail since he was 11. He too had been classified as a difficult learner. Teachers would briefly try to work with him, but when they failed, they'd pass him on to get him out of their class. When he was in the 6th grade, the school system began standardized testing, and his world fell apart. They discovered I had a 3rd grade learning capability and told my parents to take me out of school and put me in in a special education school. Tears streamed down both of our faces as he continued. I knew I wasn't learning in the regular school, but they didn't have to put me into that place. Most of the kids there had severe problems. Only 6 out of the 31 could talk. Most of them wore diapers. The supervisors didn't trust us to use tableware. During lunch, we had to eat everything with our fingers. He paused to compose himself. I tried to tell my parents what was going on, but they believed the teachers, not me. They'd given up on me. I heard Warren's pain in his words, in his every word. As soon as I could, I dropped out of school. I started hanging out on the streets, but that's when I got mixed up with a gambling ring and with drug pushers. I was good at both. Before long, I was clearing more than $40,000 in a month. I became the #1 man in the city. The look in his eyes begged me not to reject him. The reason I was so good at what I did was that I never used paper for transactions. I did it all by memory. I added and subtracted and kept all my accounts in my head. All types of business people worked through me because they knew that if I got caught, there would be no paper evidence. And this was the boy they said was too dumb to learn. He had to be a genius to memorize years of accounts in his head. I considered the differences between the two of us. Why had things gone wrong for him and not for me? One of the most obvious answers was our parents. Mine never gave up on me. His did. I thank God every day for my mother. When everyone else considered me hopeless, she kept on believing in me. When the whole world told her I was a lost cause, she never lost faith. My mother placed her faith not just in me, because I, like Warren, would mess up. My mother put her faith a giant step further. She placed her trust in the power of God to work through me. Today, I often think of Warren sitting out his young life in prison. He'll be close to 80 years old when he completes his sentence. I could have been him. He could have been me. If he'd had the same training as I, he could have been a banker or stockbroker. Who knows? Instead, the world convinced him that he wasn't capable of succeeding at anything but crime. Any student of psychology knows that if you tell a person something again and again, the person will believe it. In frustration, a mother shouts, "You're just like your father, a good for nothing bum." Sooner or later, her son will believe that too. There must be a thousand Warrens out there who had failed in life because no one cared enough to believe in them. A couple years ago, I met a man who lamented the fact that his son seemed to have given up on life. He fails at every job he takes, the father said. It's not that he hasn't had the best of everything. He has. The best families, the best education, the best business opportunities a person could ever want. But everything he touches goes wrong. Do you think you could talk with him, possibly help him? I agreed to try to help. The boy was a good looking, well mannered 27-year-old. We talked about his life and about his schooling. When I shared my experience with him, I could see tears forming in his eyes. "I can relate to you so well," he whispered. I stared at him in surprise. How can this guy understand my background? I wondered. He had the best of everything. His monthly allowance was more than my yearly salary. The young man continued, "My dad doesn't realize how much he pushes me. He expects me to get everything right from the beginning, whether it was learning to ride a bike or playing golf. He'd call me a loser if I did not shine. He said that if I didn't do it right, I'll end up like his brother, my Uncle Bob." The young man studied his hands for a moment, then continued, "I guess I heard it so much that I started giving up. When things don't work, I quit." Later, the father asked about our conversation. Before answering, I asked the dad if he could think of anything that would cause the boy to give up. "Are you kidding?" The father sneered. "That kid had the best of everything." I mentioned that his son had referred to an Uncle Bob. At the mere mention of Bob's name, the dad exploded, ranting for some time on how his brother was a born loser. "Unfortunately, my son is starting to act just like him." "When did you first notice the similarities between your brother and your son?" "At quite an early age." "Really? Did the boy hang out with your brother?" "No, I wouldn't allow that." "Do you believe the offensive behavior is in your family genes?" I asked. "Absolutely not. I'm not that way." I took a deep breath and carefully brought up the problem of labeling people. The dad grew angry at me. "I would never do that to my son." The man stormed away from me. I wondered if I'd ever see or hear from him again, and I worried over the fate of the hapless young man. A few days later, the dad called me. "Terry, I'm sorry for getting angry at you. You hit too close to home. I was so afraid that my son would be a loser that I labeled him without realizing it. And now he's become like my brother. Do you think it's too late for my son and me? Never. I directed him to Mark 9:23, which declares, "Everything is possible for him who believes." You and your son need to learn the art of believing in each other and in God. If you expect the worst from people, you'll get the worst. If you practice believing the best through the power of God, the best will manifest itself. Today, the son is in medical school and doing very well. His dad is his biggest supporter, whether the boy gets a good grade or a bad one. Many school systems regularly label children. Terms such as slow learner, attention deficit disorder, D student, culturally disadvantaged, hyperactive, and at risk child are counterproductive to the purpose of education itself. These labels work in the brain in much the same way as bad cholesterol clogs the veins, preventing the healthy flow of positive education. If Albert Einstein were alive today, his student file would read slow learner, possible attention deficit disorder. Teachers called Thomas Edison, considered by many to have been the greatest American inventor, a lazy learner. Consider what painful childhood experiences shaped the lives of people such as Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi or Abraham Lincoln, Adolf Hitler or Idi Amin. Many great individuals have succeeded in spite of society's labeling system. Many more have become murderers and scoundrels because they couldn't shake off the bad memories. The overwhelming majority of prisoners doing hard time in America's prison system today were abused as children, while the only hope for redirecting the lives of these individuals is the power of Jesus Christ. Society can make a difference in the lives of the next generation, and one giant step would be to can the labels. That sounds good, but how does one go about canning the labels that have been glued on since childhood? The first step is to can the urge to label other people, to stop thinking of others in terms of the simplistic titles. He's lazy, she's sloppy, etc. Labeling is a habit like any other habit, and like any other habit, it can be broken. This is where God comes in. He's the one who promises to give you the strength to overcome, and he keeps his promises. Claiming God's promises for strength is more than practicing a Pollyanna, everything is beautiful attitude. It's more than the philosophy of if I think I can, I can. I discovered that winning through faith in God is a premise even for those who consider themselves spiritual wimps. Without his strength sustaining me, those labels from childhood would continue to defeat me. I would never have finished academy, never have lasted in the military, never have made the President's Honor Guard, never have graduated from college, and never have completed my master's degree. And that's only the beginning of the rest of my life.